Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Jenny Dietrich.
Yeah, you're just
I was
messing
trying
with.
to do it as fast as I could.
You're messing with me. You're messing with the listeners. It's just, oh, Ginny, I don't know. Don't we have enough problems in 2020 without creating new ones?
I can't.
I mean, all you're doing is saying your name. It should be simple.
I know. It should be. You're right, but it's 2020. And well, I sat there for a second and I was like, should I wait 5 seconds? Should I talk over him? How should I do this?
Wow.
And that's how it came out. So,
Well, that's okay. I maybe next time I will simply introduce you so we can just bypass that altogether.
Maybe that's not a bad idea.
So, in any case, so speaking of introducing you, since one of us is leaving, we have to figure out how to tell the audience.
I'm sorry, where are we going?
Oh, no, because
I was like, oh, I'm being fired. I get it now. I get it.
Yeah.
It's a little slow.
Yeah.
Tired this week.
That's good. That's good. No, the topic.
That was a bad segue.
The topic is when an employee is leaving, how do you handle the client transition? Because this is something that just about every agency of every size, except for a solo, has to handle at some point or another. If you're a solo and you're leaving, well, that's called closing down the business. So. Generally speaking.
Right.
But if you have an employee, or it could even be a contractor who's got direct client contact, if you're making a team member change, how do you handle that communication with the client to make sure that it goes as smoothly as possible? So that's what we're talking about today. Don't worry, or maybe worry, both of us are actually sticking around.
Yeah, you might want to worry about that, but then you don't have to listen.
Ginny apparently thinks she's getting fired, so I'm
like,
not sure that I can do that. Yeah.
I mean, you can, just don't send me a link every week.
Well, there's that. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I won't send you your paycheck either.
Yeah, well, thanks. Don't do that anyway.
Ooh,
this question did come up. This question did come up in the community, and it was, one of our employees is leaving. Sad for us, but she's leaving on great terms, and we're excited for her next role at a new agency. We need to notify clients. Is it more appropriate coming from the employee who is leaving, or best to come from management?
And what is the answer?
Well, I think the answer is it depends. I will also tell you that I did a really jerky thing when I left Fleischman Hillard, and I had an email all ready to go, clients BCC'd, the whole thing, wrote it, went in and told my boss. They, of course, escorted me out because I was going to another agency. Went back into my office, hit send, packed everything up, and left. And I had a boss who is phenomenal. And she called me later and she said, that was a really jerky thing to do. And I was like, it was? And she explained why. And I was like, oh, yeah, that was a really jerky thing to do. I'm sorry. That should not have come from me. But I was young and stupid and naive. And I knew that they were going to walk me out. So I had it already. Like, it didn't even occur to me that they should be the ones to tell the clients, not me.
Right.
And for me to hit send as they're shutting my email down, that was really jerky to do. But
yeah, that was not the best behavior.
No, it was not.
But I think it raises the point that, first of all, from management standpoint, you often don't know what your employee is going to do. And sometimes sometimes it will be with bad intention, and sometimes it's just because they weren't thinking or didn't realize or didn't know any better, those kinds of things. So you always have to be prepared for the unexpected in these situations. To me, the most important thing anytime you've got an employee leaving is that you've got a process that you're going through. And so you're sitting there, and so part of the transition should be to work with that individual to figure out which. You should already know what projects they're working on, but really get good status updates and anything that's critical to the relationship, so that you can understand exactly where the relationship stands between that team member and the client at that point in time, because that will help inform how you do the notification of the client. If they've got a big event the next day, you might wait until after the big event to share that news, so you can modulate the timing a bit. You can modulate, and in some cases, it can be more appropriate for the team member to share it. If this is someone that you completely trust to do a good job in the handoff, and they've got the kind of relationship with the client that the client will take it better hearing it from them. Sometimes that
Right.
happens. So you can walk through it that way. I would say more often than not, at a minimum, their supervisor should be part of the conversation, or may need to do it directly themselves, or you may need to escalate it even above the direct supervisor to, to the owner or someone who's more of a relationship manager. But I think it really needs to be case by case based on the individual team member and the individual client.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. We just had somebody leave, and for the most part, I called everybody to tell them, but there was one client that I just don't have a relationship with. And so what the employee and I did was craft a plan and a process for what that would look like, because I had plenty of notice. She gave me plenty of notice. And we were able to do that and start to bring other people into the client meetings so that when we ripped the Band-Aid off, it wasn't so bad. The client was like, okay, I get it. I seem to be well taken care of. And it was kind of a non-event. I was kind of surprised. I was like, oh, okay.
Right. In my experience, people worry way too much when these transitions happen. Most clients do just fine with the transition. They're going to be looking more closely at you during that transition period to make sure that things aren't falling through the cracks. But it's really how you handle the transition more so than the fact that there's simply been a transition. So, I don't think this should be the kind of thing where you worry too much about it, but what you need to do is you need to be prepared for the questions that you're going to get from the client, which will always start with, what does this mean for me? They may not say it in so many words, but that's what they care about. They don't care about you and your agency and what it means for you and what you have to do for recruiting and, the relationships that you have, blah, blah.
Yeah,
they don't care about that.
Yeah.
They don't care about that.
Right.
They're we've said before, clients in some ways are like children. What does it mean for me? What's in it for me? And so you need to be prepared to answer that question. And in many cases, particularly if you're a small agency, you may not have all of the answers right away, because chances are you're going to have to do some stopgap things to cover, because it's rare when an employee leaves to have enough time to actually replace them before they've gone. And so you're going to have to sort of, juggle a few balls in the air and keep things going for a period of time. And so you need to communicate with the client, what your immediate plan is, even if it's probably going to change over time.
Yeah, I totally agree. A couple of comments from the community on this were, from my past experience coming from management, and it includes explaining the change and what's next, who will take over the account, and CC their employee to wish her the best and allow the clients to do the same. So I thought that was an interesting thought, is just, when you send the note, if it's via email, I tend to pick up the phone and call people, but if you're sending it over email, copying the person who's leaving so that the client and the client's team can wish that person well. I thought that was a good piece of advice.
Yeah, and so that also raises the point that whenever possible, you don't want to leave this to the last minute. So you ideally don't want to have this. I mean, there are some cases, obviously, if it's a termination, that's different. If someone's going to a competitive agency, and so, you need to literally walk them out the door, it may have to happen more quickly. More often than not, there is lead time in these situations. And so, to the extent that you can give the client a little bit of time to adjust, not too much. So if someone gives you 2 months notice, don't go running and telling clients right away.
Right.
Take advantage of the time, but don't wait until 4 p.m. if 5 p.m. is when they're packing their bags and leaving.
4:50. Okay, by the way.
because a lot of clients have built a strong relationship with your employee, and so they would like to be able to say something nice to them, and they may ask for their personal email address or those kinds of things, and so you want to be able to allow them to have that. Because that will help them feel better about your agency overall. And you also don't want to ever inadvertently make it appear as if there's something squirrely about the change if there isn't. Right? And so if you wait to the last minute, it can look like someone was terminated, even if they decided to do it voluntarily because maybe they're moving cross country and they gave you notice 2 months ago, whatever. By leaving it to the last second, it makes it look like something bad happened. And you don't want to leave that impression either.
She got fired and we walked her out with 2 minutes notice.
Right.
No.
Now, that said, if it is a termination, then you need to be prepared to immediately talk to the clients, because terminations sometimes go wrong. And as we've talked about before, it's very difficult to predict which terminations are actually going to end badly. I'm horrible at it. I have
Oh,
thought
yeah,
that
you can't. Yeah.
terminations
Yeah.
that would go badly. There was barely a ripple. I thought terminations that were going to go fine ended up turning into total you know what shows. So you need to be prepared if there is a termination before you even sit down and terminate the employee. You need to know what your plan is with all of their clients,
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
communicate with them quickly so that there is not an opportunity for that individual, because of frustration, anger, whatever, to reach out to the client directly and pollute the waters, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so you need to be prepared for those kinds of things.
Well, and I would say even if somebody's leaving voluntarily and it's on good terms, there's still the opportunity, I mean, for them to pollute the waters, even if it's on the
There
best
is.
intentions.
Yep.
So I think having a plan, knowing what it is, we have a really strict thing, thankfully to my assistant, we have a very strict process that we follow. And it's, broken into 3 buckets. If they're leaving and we have notice and they don't have to be escorted out, if they're leaving and they've given us notice, but they're going to a competitor, and then if they've been terminated. And it's very strict. It's like, boom, 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 boom. You do this, you do this, you do this. And we get that all done within, half an hour. That allows us to really move quickly. And I'll admit that I was a little reticent to create that process because I was like, oh, well, I feel like it's karma and that we're, bringing bad luck to ourselves. And that's just not the case. It has been extraordinarily helpful in
Right.
having that available. And it's literally a checklist. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this.
Right, and the termination process is one where it's very easy to overlook things.
Yes.
If it's in a termination, it may be because the termination is coming in part out of your own frustration, and so you just want to get it done.
Sure.
In some cases, it's because terminations are uncomfortable, you may skip over things because you just don't want to have to think about it. And that's a huge mistake. But even in friendly ones, you still need to make sure that you cross the T's, dot the I's.
Absolutely.
This is something you should have vetted by, an HR consultant or someone like that, someone who actually knows, what the any particular rules that may apply to your situation. They'll often have decision trees. So, for example, if you're terminating someone over the age of 40, it's different than if you terminate someone under the age of 40. The paperwork is entirely different. And the rules around it are very different in most states. So you need to make sure that you're on top of that kind of thing so that you don't inadvertently end up with a problem down the road. So having those checklists can be really helpful to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks. And the client piece of it has to be part of it.
Yeah. And the client piece, I mean, depending on what it is, but the client piece is usually number one. If it's a termination, their email and things like that are usually number one, the text stuff, but then client's number 2. So yeah. It definitely has to have, and like I said earlier, I prefer to pick up the phone and have that conversation versus sending an email. I just find
Absolutely.
that it's far better that way.
Yeah, I mean, look, most agency employees don't have contact with enough clients on a regular basis that you shouldn't be having that as an actual telephone conversation. I mean, if you're in a SaaS company and some account manager has 50 clients, okay, that's not practical. But in an agency,
Right.
I mean, most employees, maybe 2 or 3 clients tops in most
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah.
There's no excuse not to have that conversation by phone. You may want to email and set up an appointment as opposed to just calling out of the blue, whatever. I mean, you need to think through, and part of it depends on your relationship with that client, right? If you know the client, that's much easier for you, and particularly if you're the one who brought the business in, your employee leaving is going to be much less of an issue. If it's a case where it's a senior employee and they're the ones who brought the business in, those are the ones that are the toughest to handle and to message because they may have come to the agency because of that employee who's leaving.
Right.
And those are going to require a little bit more TLC from the standpoint of senior management or ownership.
Yep. My favorite thing to do is text the client and go, call me.
Don't do that.
It usually creates the opportunity for them to call you immediately. But I do it all the time. So it's not like...
If you don't do that all the time, please, I beg of you listeners, do not do that.
I do it. But I do it all the time.
If it's your regular habit, that's fine. I guess I don't like it, but...
Call me. It works.
The irony is I don't think you even have my cell phone number, so you can't text me with that message.
I don't think I do. I can't text you at all. It's terrible.
Oh, well. what can you do?
Oh, well.
But so, I think the key is having a plan, having a process, thinking through, and you need to think through those. What are the client's concerns likely to be? Part of that's looking back in the past and seeing what have their concerns previously been.
Sure.
Particularly if they've had a transition of a team member before. If it went well, great, then you can point to that and say, well, remember when Jane replaced Sally and it went smoothly, we're going to follow the same kind of process. On the other hand, if when Jane replaced Sally and it was a little rocky, then you need to communicate that you've learned your lessons from those, and so you're going to handle this transition a little bit differently. And critically, in that transition period, you need to apply some extra TLC. You don't want to go into the full overblown over-servicing, but you certainly want to err on the side of over-servicing during that window to make sure that there's no concern that balls are going to be dropped because their client contact has left.
Yeah, and I probably tend to go a little far on the side of me just checking in and making sure that everything's okay and doing that pretty consistently. I had a client say to me, "Okay, Jen, we get it. We're good. You're okay." I was like, "Okay, been a rough year."
Yeah, and I think the other important thing is in your communications with the clients, you need to exude confidence in the transition. So even if you are pulling your hair out and saying, "Oh my God, I have no idea how we're going to handle this," because a lot of times that happens in the small agency environment, right? You sit there and you've got 7 or 8 employees and one of them leaves. It can be one of those, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" Do not let the clients see it. What was that advertisement that used to run years ago? Don't let them see you sweat or something like that. Same thing here, right? Do not let the clients see how the sausage is made. Don't let them see you sweat. You need to, even if you are completely flummoxed by it, exude confidence in that communication with the client. It's all going to be fine. We've got this. And if they come across thinking that you've got this, then you're going to have a lot more runway to make mistakes, because there are always going to be mistakes in transitions. Things will always fall through the cracks, no matter how hard you try. And unless this is one of those ones where you've got one team member of like 5 that are servicing the client, so it's sort of seamless.
It's fairly, yeah.
If you're listening to this, chances are you're not in that situation with your clients, but if you are, then those transitions can go more smoothly. If it's one where it's their primary client contact or even their only client contact, that's going to be ones where things are just, that person knows things. There's institutional knowledge. There's there's things that they forgot to put into your project management tracking system that they didn't put into an email or whatever. And so you've got to be prepared for those kinds of things to happen.
Well, I have found as well that that we always joke that our job is more therapy than anything else because we tend to be the voice of reason for some clients. But I have found in the past, not in this most recent example, but in the past, there has been advice given by members of my team that I wouldn't necessarily agree with. But when you empower your team to do their thing, they do their thing. And then the client will say to you, "Well, so-and-so told me this." And you're like, okay.
Right.
So there's some of that too, where you have to your point, exude confidence and still support the advice that was given, but steer them in a different direction if it's wrong or not where it should be.
Right. But this is also an opportunity for you to shine because, particularly if you're stepping in and becoming involved, which is typically what happens whether you're at the management level or the ownership level, typically you become more involved during those transition periods. Yep. You will spot areas where you can service the client better, not necessarily even by over-servicing, but just because you've got a better strategic idea, you look at something. And I mean, almost every time I've had an employee leave in that kind of setting where I go in and I look at it, I'm like, why did they do it this way? This is inefficient. This is, you could generate better results by doing it this way. And so clients will see those as wins. So even if they loved their client contact before, if you find some of those quick wins for them, that's going to help.
Great idea.
And it's going to show that that you're paying attention. And you've got to be careful. It's a delicate balancing act because you don't want to get so sucked in that you're now doing the client service yourself on an ongoing basis. Right. So balance that out and try to, even if it's only part-time, have someone else on your team front that relationship during that transition period until you hire someone new, so that it's not just you that they're dealing with.
Yep, totally agree. All right, so exude confidence, have a process, pick up the phone and call. Those are probably the big ones.
And it depends.
And it does depend.
And so with that, I think that will bring this episode to a close. I'm Chip Griffin. She's Ginny Dietrich.
I'm Ginny Dietrich.
And it depends.